We got some bad news about Max Muncy's rehab over the weekend. We'll dig into that. Possible trade deadline talkers for the Dodgers, some possible minor league guys who might be able to help out. And we'll talk about my television debut, or at least the one that got me an IMDb page last week. Dig into all that live on Locked On Dodgers. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks to our everydayers for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. And thank you to those of you who are joining us live right now to enjoy this episode with us. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. So please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now. If this is your first time with us, my name is Jeff Snyder. My normal co-host is Vince Samperio, but Vince is on vacation this week, so it'll be just me the rest of this week. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like a lot of you. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we're bringing the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. From brakes to exhaust kits and beyond, eBay Motors has over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. And no Dodger game on Monday, which means that we have time to dig into some news from the weekend, answer some listener questions, all of that stuff. And so we're going to jump right in. The big news of the weekend was, unfortunately, that Max Muncy is not coming back anytime soon. That's the long and the short of it. He can't even swing a bat right now. He went to try to do some stuff and felt a twinge. And that's the problem with oblique injuries. They can last forever, and you can feel like you are totally over it. And then you go to actually do something athletic, and you discover, oh, nope, I wasn't over it. It's such a weird muscle that you only use in certain things, but unfortunately, swinging a baseball bat is one of those things that needs your oblique, and Max Muncy swings the bat really hard. And so when you swing as hard as Muncy does, it might take a while. And I don't think this is like in danger of putting Muncy out for the season or anything, but I'd say we're at a minimum still 3 or 4 weeks away. And that's if things heal really quickly. I remember Albert Pujols several years ago when he was on the Angels had an oblique injury and ended up taking like 3 months for him to come back. And it's just a weird muscle that makes it really hard to swing a baseball bat hard, which is what Max Muncy does. And so, when Muncy went down, and I know there's a running joke about the Dodgers medical staff and what Dave Roberts tells the media about medical stuff. And I don't have an issue with it, honestly. I think that I think there's certain things the public's entitled to know, and the details of every injury aren't necessarily one of those things. Obviously, as fans, we would like to know exactly when Muncy's going to be back. But I am okay that they guess on the conservative side or on the earlier back side most of the time. And most of the time they're wrong. We just learn not to put too much stock in it. But, when Muncy did go down, you think, okay, if it really is only a few weeks, we can deal with Kike Hernandez getting the bulk of the at-bats at third base. But, we had a question from an insider that, sorry, when I'm on my own, I got to do all the clicking myself. But this one comes from Mike Markham, our buddy Mike, more importantly, Luke's dad. But Mike, he says, with Muncy's timetable up in the air, what should the Dodgers do? Keep playing Kike until Muncy's ready, regardless of how long it takes? Trade for an established third baseman? Play Jeff at third base? Bring back Ron Say? I don't have the range anymore. Also, I don't like to bend over much for ground balls. So I'd be a bad third baseman. Ron Say wouldn't be much better than me at this point. And so really it's internal options or going outside the organization. I mean, that's kind of obvious. Internal or external. Those are the two options. My brain always comes back to Nolan Arenado. I mean, in fact, if you remember, one of my predictions before the season was that the Dodgers would trade for Nolan Arenado at the trade deadline because of an injury to Max Muncy. And I obviously wasn't wishing injury on Max Muncy. But the fact is the Cardinals aren't great this year. Last I think they're doing better than they were earlier in the year, but I think they're still, let's see. Wait for the standings to load. The Cardinals are 28-30, 7 games out of first place in the National League Central, but unfortunately, they are currently tied for a wild card spot. And that means that I don't know if the Cardinals are trading right now, but the trade deadline's still almost 2 months away, but the Dodgers need something right now. Max Muncy might be back by the trade deadline. And that's the other issue, I guess, with trading for a guy like Nolan Arenado is when Muncy does come back, what do you do with him? Because I don't know if you heard, the Dodgers have a pretty good DH already. And Arenado and Muncy, Muncy has played other positions. He's not going to go back to first base because that's where they have Freddie Freeman. And we definitely don't want injuries for Shohei or Freddie to open up a spot for Muncy at one of those positions. He's played second base, but that was back when the shift existed. And Muncy turned himself into a solid second baseman, actually made an all-star team as a second baseman. But I think defensively, he was helped a lot by the shift. And I don't know that he would have the range to be a second baseman now. And so you do run into, if you trade for Arenado, you're kind of, it seems like that would be a move for if they decide that Muncy is months away from coming back, which might happen. Unfortunately, you never know with an oblique, but that's kind of, so yeah, it would depend on two things. It would depend on Muncy being a long way from coming back and the Cardinals playing poorly enough that they were willing to trade Arenado. I'm sure there are other third basemen on, or who could potentially be on the market who aren't quite the big name of Nolan Arenado, but there are options externally. An internal option that I wanted to talk about a little bit is Andre Lipcius. You remember Andre Lipcius, the Dodgers traded for him this offseason, maybe even during spring training. I think it was during spring training. He was on the 40-man roster at the time. The Dodgers ended up DFAing him and sneaking him through waivers to get him off the 40-man roster. So he's playing at AAA Oklahoma City, not on the 40-man roster, but he's batting .318, .389 on base percentage, .594 slugging percentage. So that's a .983 OPS in AAA. 51 strikeouts and 239 plate appearances, which is slightly better than average strikeout rate. So there's a lot of things about Andre Lipcius that you think, well, maybe he could be the option. Now, one thing we've learned a lot is that how you play at Oklahoma City doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play that way in Los Angeles. I'm just looking to see how much of, because another guy we're going to talk about a little bit has had maybe some inflated success. Pacific Coast League notoriously is a hitters league. And so it's hard to know exactly what to expect from that .983 OPS that Andre Lipcius has. And when you factor in also that he would have to be added to the 40-man roster, seems like Andre Lipcius would require cutting bait with Chris Taylor. And, as we've mentioned before, I love Chris Taylor, but I am on board with figuring out a way to get him at least off the active roster, maybe off the 40-man roster. It's more complicated than that. There's also 4 catchers on the 40-man roster, 3 of who have a future with the Dodgers, and the other one of whom is Austin Barnes. And so if they cut bait with Barnes, made Hunter Fiducia the backup catcher, whether that meant trading Barnes to a team that's looking for veteran leadership at the backup catcher role or whatever, or cutting him, obviously they'd rather trade him. He's under contract, but there's different ways they could open up a 40-man roster spot. But any of these guys, Elisheva is in the live chat right now. She hasn't mentioned it today because we haven't talked about the outfield yet, but she's always wanting them to call up Drew Avens. And as I've mentioned before, Drew Avens is not on the 40-man roster. There's a lot of these guys who, while technically they might deserve a chance in the big leagues, if they're not on the 40-man roster, it's really hard to get them up because you have to make tough decisions. And I do think the Dodgers are getting closer to making those tough decisions. And maybe the trade deadline helps because if you trade 2 guys on the 40-man roster for 1 guy, then you suddenly have an empty 40-man roster spot. The Dodgers actually do have a 40-man roster spot available right now because they did DFA Eliezer Hernandez the other day, but they're unlikely to use his 40-man roster spot on a position player, just because that's not what teams do. They don't want to get too out of sync on the the hitters versus pitchers on the roster. So anyway, I see a comment from our buddy Craig asking about Trey Sweeney. Well, guess what, Craig? That's what we're going to talk about in the next segment. So yeah, a lot more to talk about. We'll dig into some more stuff about the potential Dodgers. And then in the last segment, I am going to talk about my television debut that got me an IMDb page last week on TNT. So we'll dig into that in the third segment. So anyway, thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. And please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more with any winning bet of $5. I'm looking at the odds for Tuesday. The Dodgers playing the Pirates. It's Tyler Glasnow against Jared Jones. And the Dodgers are, the spread is minus 1.5 for the Dodgers. So if you think the Dodgers are going to win by at least 2 runs, put $5 on that. You win, you get $150 in bonus bets. Or the straight money. The Dodgers are minus 188 favorites, heavily favored. You know what? You might want to bet against that one. I don't know. No, don't bet against the Dodgers to win. But if you feel confident in that, Jared Jones is really good. Tyler Glasnow is better. So we'll see what happens. But I like that point spread. You think Dodgers are going to win by at least 2? Go for it. Put $5. You win. You get $150 in bonus bets. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, I am back. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. Special thanks to our everydayers. If you're not an everydayer, it's really easy to become one. Just watch or listen every weekday morning. Also, thanks for being here live with us. If you are, we're trying to go live as much as we can. I'll probably be live every night this week. So please keep checking that out. Remember to subscribe wherever you're watching and listening right now. You can also go beyond the podcast and become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. We text back and forth. You can text one-on-one with us. Just a few bucks a month. Free 14-day trial. So check that out. Also, check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles, the 2 24/7 streaming channels on YouTube from the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Sports LA is where you can find the Locked On Dodgers postcast after most Dodger games. I will be filling in for Pete on the postcast later this week for about a week. I'll be doing the a few games of the Pirates series, maybe the whole Pirates series. I can't remember for sure. And then the Yankees series. I will be doing the postcast and this podcast when it's a weekday. So check that out. Also, remember, you can catch every pitch of every Dodger game on SiriusXM or the SXM app just by searching for Dodgers. And major correction for the first segment. I messed up. I said Luke's dad is Mike Markham. Mike's son is Jackson. I apologize, Jackson. I know your name. There's another kid, an 11-year-old kid named Luke Cook, who I meant to shout out to. And that's where I got mixed up. Luke Cook has been listening. Is from, he told me where he's from. Now I can't find it. Where is it? From Nashville. And Luke is 11, and he's emailed with back and forth with me a couple times. So that's where I got mixed up. Jackson Markham is awesome. He's our 9-year-old everydayer. Luke Cook is our 11-year-old everydayer. Levi Teitelbaum is also a 11-year-old everydayer. We got some great kids listening to this show. If you got kids, let them listen to the show. It's an awesome show. And, very family friendly. So anyway, digging back into the episode, Craig in the last segment had put a comment saying maybe Trey Sweeney would be a good option. Trey Sweeney is a shortstop who the Dodgers traded for this last offseason and definitely has potential. We also had an email that asked about Trey Sweeney from Edward Johnson. He said, could Trey Sweeney be the answer to any of the Dodgers infield problems? It appears that he can hit. What do you think, or can he field? What do you think his future is with the Dodgers? Now, interestingly, Ed, Trey Sweeney can definitely field. That's his skill. His main skill is he's great defensively. He's been hitting well lately, and he's on people's mind because he hit 5 home runs in the recent series or 6 home runs in the recent series that the Oklahoma City baseball team had with the Albuquerque Isotopes. And so Sweeney is very hot right now. My concern about Sweeney is that he hasn't been very good before this Albuquerque series. In fact, he has 9 home runs this year in AAA. 7 of them have come in Albuquerque, which I mentioned the Pacific Coast League is a hitter's league. Albuquerque is the hitter friendliest of all of the parks in the PCL. And so with 7 of Sweeney's 9 home runs coming in Albuquerque, one of them was an inside the Parker. I'm just not totally sold on that. And even with all of that, with that great series, that brings his OPS up to 799. But before this last 6-game series with Albuquerque, he was batting .232 with a .338 on base percentage, .347 slugging, .685 OPS in a hitter-friendly league. None of this is meant to be a slam on Trey Sweeney, just to say I am not sold that his bat is ready for the big leagues based on one good week in Albuquerque. I think that more likely he got on a hot streak in a place where it's easy to get on a hot streak. I do think Trey Sweeney has a future as a big leaguer. I think he's going to have to prove that he can hit consistently in order to be a starting shortstop in the big leagues. But his glove is definitely big league ready. But I just don't think that his bat is big league ready. His strikeout rate is higher than average. All in all, he's just not, I don't think he's a big league hitter at this point. I don't see Trey Sweeney playing a part in the Dodgers' success in 2024. In the future, maybe, but this year, I just don't think so. And then we had another question from an insider that kind of digs into some of that. Where is it? This one comes from Steve Farowich from Bellevue, Washington. Grew up in Whittier. His dad's from Brooklyn, so he's a longtime Dodger fan. And he says there's a lot of talk about what the Dodgers should do at the trade deadline. Question is, what would you think if they didn't do anything? And Steve's take, he says, I think the bullpen's fine, especially when they're healthy. What they should look for is a player for the bottom of the order who started slow but has decent upside and is versatile defensively. But Steve is setting us up there. He says that way they wouldn't have to give up too much in return. Somebody like, say, Kike Hernandez or Gavin Lux or Miguel Vargas. So why gamble on the devil you don't know when they'd probably be looking for somebody like the players they already have? And that's an interesting point that Steve brings up. If you do think, you guys know I'm a big Gavin Lux fan. I do think Gavin Lux is eventually going to be a good big league hitter. We're past that 150 at bat mark now with it. They had talked about he has gotten a little bit better, still not great. And so I don't know if Gavin Lux is going to be a good hitter this year. And the Dodgers maybe need a good hitter. And if they could shore up the rest of the bottom of the order would start hitting better, like if we could get, decent, 100 and 105 OPS plus performance from Gavin Lux, that would be fine if the rest of the bottom of the lineup was doing about the same too. Problem is the bottom of the lineup has been almost a black hole for most of this year, which means that every part of that black hole gets a spotlight shine on it. And so that's the concern there with Lux. Kike Hernandez, I love Kike. Obviously, he's a fan favorite. Kike has always been a mistake hitter, and I feel like even now he's not even as consistent at hitting the mistakes. I don't feel good about Kike in the lineup against right-handed pitching very often at all. And that's kind of going back to the Muncy thing. That's the issue right now. Kike is kind of the option at third base. They do have Miguel Rojas, who can play third base and is a better option hitting than Kike against right-handed pitching. All in all, it's just kind of, there's so many question marks. And so I guess my overarching answer to Steve's question is, I guess I should address Miguel Vargas next. Miguel Vargas, I think he's going to hit. I would be fine with Miguel Vargas playing every day right now, except I'm sure they have questions defensively. I think that's the big issue. And Vargas doesn't have the defensive versatility that you might think from a guy who's played first, second, third, and left in the big leagues in his career, because the Dodgers, if they liked him defensively at second or third, he would still be playing there. And left field, he seems to be okay. But I'm not convinced that he is a good defensive left fielder. So I do think Miguel Vargas' bat could be good enough to justify playing an average defensive left fielder. But I think that's where the question is. So, but the answer to Steve's question, I don't believe that Kike is going to break out. They talk a lot about his hard hit rate, that it's good, and it is, but and maybe it's just a gut thing. I don't know. I'm generally into stats more than guts, and more than the eye test, but Kike looks bad to me right now. And so maybe he breaks out. I'm not confident in that. Gavin Lux, I'm getting less confident in the breakout coming. So I do think the Dodgers are going to have to look externally and try to find some answers outside the organization to help with this year. Because the fact is, while I am a big proponent of enjoy the 6 months of the regular season, baseball season, the fun of it is you get the whole summer of watching baseball. And I don't think you should live in existential dread of October. But this team, when October does come, we're going to expect them to win. We're going to want them to win. And so right now is the time for them to address those things. And I don't think a wish and a prayer is going to be enough right now. So either those guys are going to need to break out soon in the next month and a half as we lead up to the trade deadline, or they're not going to get their chance this year. And the Dodgers are going to go outside the organization. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. That's kind of it for the questions. I'm going to come back in a minute. Last week, TNT showed an episode of a documentary TV show called Rich and Shameless. It was about Yasiel Puig and his journey from Cuba to the big leagues and all of his career. And I was on it. And I'm going to dig in, give you a little bit behind the scenes on that experience, my thoughts. I finally watched the episode today, and I have some thoughts. So anyway, I'm going to dig into that. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. And please continue to keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Hey, we are back. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Thanks for being here with us live. Thanks for making us your first listen every weekday morning. Thanks for being every dayer, all that stuff. Become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. Check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles over on YouTube. And catch every pitch of every Dodger game on SiriusXM or the SXM app by searching for Dodgers. So last week, I guess it was on Tuesday, maybe. There's a documentary TV show on TNT called Rich and Shameless. It's in its second season. And the most recent episode that premiered last week was about Yasiel Puig. And I was on it. I wasn't the main person on it. There were, but it was all about Puig. Puig himself did not participate in it. And for good reason, honestly. And honestly, if I had asked more and better questions beforehand, I probably wouldn't have been on it either. And I'll tell you why. If you've watched it, it just tells the story of Puig's journey from Cuba through smugglers, human trafficking, eventually getting to the United States, making the big leagues shortly thereafter, and his rise and fall with the Dodgers, his trade to the Reds, his trade to Cleveland, and eventually leaving baseball. And it touches a little bit at the end on his current legal problems, where he is tied up in sports betting scandal. He's not being charged with illegal gambling. He's being charged with lying to investigators. I did a whole episode last year about why I believe Yasiel Puig is being railroaded, being targeted because of a language barrier, a lot of things. You can go back and listen to that episode. I've done a few episodes that talk about Puig, and that's why they reached out to me. We filmed this over a year ago. It was last March, mid-March of 2023, that we filmed this. And shortly before that, I had done an episode talking about Puig, and that's how I got on these producers' radar. And they reached out to me. And the way it was presented to me was, hey, you're a Dodger fan. You know a lot about the Dodgers. You seem to know a lot about Yasiel Puig from listening to your podcast. And so we want to have you on this documentary. And a question I wish I had asked immediately was, what's the documentary show called? Because if they had told me this show is called Rich and Shameless, I would have said no thank you, because that would have been a very big hint to me what the, and I shouldn't overstate this. I don't think the episode was terrible. I don't think it was really unfair to Puig, but when we got to filming, Jeff Spiegel, you probably know of him from Twitter and from his own podcast. Jeff and I were together on this. We were two podcasters. One, they told us that they were going to make sure that the names of our podcasts were in the episode. They weren't. They just put podcaster under both of our names, which is, whatever. But we did a pre-recording call before Jeff and I both traveled to Southern California to film this. Jeff and I and the producer got together on a Zoom call, and we had a conversation, and we talked about Puig and talked about our memories and stuff. And when we got to film in LA that day, it turned out that they had the episode done, and what they wanted was a couple mouthpieces to say the lines that they wanted people to say. And some of it was lines that Jeff and I had said in our Zoom call. So it's not that they were completely putting words in our mouths, but they also kind of were. And it was pretty early in the process, the way that they would, and we filmed for about 4 hours, and they used like 100 words that I said in the episode. But as we were filming, the producer would say, okay, now, and by the way, the producer didn't travel. He is from England. He didn't even travel. So we were on Zoom with him, with the crew that they had contracted with in this room. It was a disaster. It took the whole day to film for 4 hours, to use 100 words. But he would say, okay, now I want you to say this line. And like, there's one, I was so glad this line didn't get in. And I assume it's because both Jeff and I didn't say it with our hearts in it, because he's like, I want you to say this line about a 5-tool player, and you can have all the tools in the world, but if you don't have a good toolbox to put them in, they're useless. And it's a terrible line, dude. And so I was like, there's no way in the world I want my voice saying that line on this TV show. And so I said it very, very poorly on purpose. And Jeff didn't do much better. And that line didn't make the show. And I think it's because Jeff and I both knew that line sucks. But there was one line that they used of mine about when Puig went to Korea, and they used me saying, but Puig traveled halfway around the world, but he couldn't outrun the problems he had made for himself. And they used that to lead into the discussion of the gambling probe that got Puig into his current legal troubles. We never talked about the gambling probe. I was talking about the fact that Puig hadn't been able to get back to the big leagues. But they used that to, it just things like that. And it was pretty early in the process that I realized, they're not really looking to actually get our opinions on anything. They're looking for two guys with credibility in the Dodgers circle to say the words that we want them to say. And it was about halfway through the filming that I actually found out what the show was called. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that they didn't use much of my footage in this episode, because I don't think I was a good guest. Because once I realized what they were doing, the funniest one, I will tell you a really funny one. They were talking about Puig Mania, and they asked me to say something about Puig Mania. And I, being a Dodger fan, understanding Dodger history, understanding the origins of Puig Mania, I compared it to Fernando Mania. And this British producer said, okay, we got to do that again. I don't know what this Fernando Mania is, but clearly Puig Mania was a reference to Beatlemania. I'm like, dude, Fernando Mania happened 20 years more recently than Beatlemania, happened in the same stadium as Puig Mania. Every Dodger fan knows about Fernando Mania. It's clearly, and Fernando Mania was probably based somewhat on Beatlemania. It's a word, mania, but Puig Mania definitely had more to do with Fernando Valenzuela than the Beatles. But so I said it again. I didn't mention the Beatles. Like, there's no way in the world I'm saying the Beatles in this and making it look like I don't know anything about the Dodgers. I took out the part about Fernando. I think they did have me saying the phrase Puig mania, but it was just, it was enlightening and not in a good way to see what goes into these shows. And again, I don't think they were super unfair to Puig. I don't know. Like, they named their show Rich and Shameless. It's a clickbait title for a show. And so, of course, they're looking for something sensational. And I wish I had known. That's why I wouldn't have done it. Not because, like, I do love Yasiel Puig, one of my favorite players of all time. I do think he's gotten a bum rap. I think there are a lot of things, and that's why I thought that, because one of the episodes I did was about Puig's mental state and his mental illness and stuff, and the things that weren't addressed when he was playing in the big leagues. I thought that's why they wanted me on it, to come on and be fair to Puig. And when I realized that they wanted somebody to come on and say the words that they wanted said about Puig, if I had known, I wouldn't have done it. But I have an IMDb page now. I played Self on this episode of Rich and Shameless. And again, it's not a terrible episode. It does give a lot. If you watch it, hopefully you'll have more sympathy for Puig and what he went. I mean, he's been through a lot. And I love Yasiel Puig. I feel bad that I ended up taking part in this show, because I do feel like everybody likes to talk about Puig, and often they don't know what they're talking about. And I hope that I didn't contribute too much to that dynamic. But if you want to watch it, check it out. It's on, if you have the TNT app, you can watch it on there. It's on the HBO Max app, or it will be. They don't have all the latest episodes up, but it'll be on there. Anyway, it was interesting. And if you have any questions about it, let me know. I obviously didn't cover everything about the experience, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So anyway, that is going to do it for me for today. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. Thanks for being here with us live tonight. If you were, we really appreciate that. We'll see you live the rest of this week too. Thanks for being every day, or if you are. If you're not, it's easy to become one. Just watch or listen every weekday morning. Make that easier on yourself by subscribing wherever you're watching or listening right now. Be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles, the two 24/7 streaming channels over on YouTube from the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, you can go beyond the podcast and become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at VinceSince91. I'm on Twitter at Snydog. Both of our DMs are open there. You can also email us, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or send us a voicemail or a text message, 323-863-LOCK, 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.